I just said a quiet prayer and just wished and hoped to God that everybody could make it out.
Tonight, we take you into the evacuated Metis settlement of Paddle Prairie, ravaged by wildfire.
But basically, the things that I said were reinforced and quoted in the end.
No response from her critics now after man camps and their potential of violence against Indigenous women is documented by the National Inquiry.
The wording of the bill creates enormous uncertainty that we could spend the next 20 years in court arguing about.
And the bill to harmonize Canadian law with Indigenous rights is losing traction as the summer break for Parliament quickly approaches. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Residents of High Level and surrounding First Nations in northern Alberta have returned home after being evacuated for 2 weeks. Wildfires had forced thousands out of their communities.
But the Paddle Prairie Metis settlement remains evacuated. Homes were lost and the fire continues to burn. Paddle Prairie gave APTN's Tamara Pimentel an exclusive tour of the damage.
This is what's left of some homes on the Paddle Prairie Métis settlement. Places where families were raised, memories made, a lifetime of hard work burned to the ground. 15 houses and nearly 80% of Paddle Prairie's forest is gone. Smoke is still visible from the highway after the wildfire roared through the area last week.
This is something that would deeply impact any member of Paddle Prairie. Like when I drove it the first time, I was lost for words. This is I grew up here. I've spent 40 plus years here.
The settlement remains evacuated, but Dean Ducharme, disaster emergency manager, took APTN on a tour of the devastation that hit many. He says at least one trap line is gone, along with billions in lumber.
To see my community hit so hard was unreal, but to see my community get together and come home and help, that's what makes us, the community of Paddle Prairie, so great.
About 40 members remain to help fight the fires and cook for the crews. Alden Armstrong is one of them. He stayed back when the fire reached the hamlet.
We all stayed based on a really simple principle. It's our home. It's our home. We ain't going nowhere. At one point when we looked up, it was in the atmosphere. It was like an atomic bomb had exploded. I just said a quiet prayer and just wished and hoped to God that everybody could make it out.
The Chuckegg Creek fire remains out of control. It grew to over 270,000 hectares. But rain and cooler temperatures are helping to decrease that. Ducharme says there is no word on when members can return to Paddle Prairie, but says this will all be rebuilt one way or another.
This is going to bring us together even closer. This disaster is going to bring us a lot closer.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, on the Paddle Prairie Métis settlement.
Now that the final report into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls has been released, those who testified are getting to see what their work helped create. Iqaluit-based Mi'kmaq researcher who testified, getting to see what was in the report was important because of what they went through to get there. Ken Driscoll has more.
TJ Lightfoot testified in front of the MMIWG inquiry when it appeared in Iqaluit back in September 2018. A part of the testimony was about man camps, remote sites for workers, mostly men, who can be a risk for local Indigenous women. Nunavut's mining industry responded loudly.
But the personal attacks was not what I was prepared for. I knew, there's a difference between academically challenging someone's sources, which, if you don't agree with mine, that's fine, go ahead, criticize all you want. But when it comes to a personal attack, it would, I think, basically they reinforce what I was saying about the gaslighting, the violence that LGBTQ2 people experience, especially Indigenous women.
The official campaign was led by the Nunavut Chamber of Mines. Their president spoke out against the description of man camps, published a letter in the territorial newspaper calling Lightfoot's credentials into question, and railed against the testimony. That was just on the record. Lightfoot says lots was going on behind the scenes as well.
In the afterwards, those mining companies specifically attacked me. They tried to have me fired. They wrote letters that were based on newspaper articles from a different source that didn't correctly relay what I had said. But I think that affirms I must have said something that struck a nerve with them. They felt vulnerable.
Lightfoot is Mi'kmaq from Elsipogto, New Brunswick. When the MMIWG report was released this week, Lightfoot's points about the potential dangers of man camps in small Indigenous communities nationwide were all included.
But basically, the things that I said were reinforced and quoted in the end, and those points are the ones that I received the most criticism for. So it's good in a way because I feel like I've not been vindicated, but it feels okay, there was a purpose for all of this.
When Lightfoot testified, the mining industry seized on the small part of the testimony they disagreed with and hammered on it. Now the report is out, a similar thing is happening. Critics are seizing on the word genocide instead of the totality of the report. Lightfoot used the word genocide in her testimony and thinks it belongs.
You can say it's not all you want, but if you look at what is the definition, it is. It's undeniable. It's absolutely part of it.
Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
In Saskatchewan, APTN spoke to an advocate from the Saskatoon-based group Women Walking Together, who just returned from Ottawa after attending the final report from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls. Darlene Okimesom-Sikot helped form the group in 2005, believing there was a lack of concern for missing and murdered women and girls in Saskatchewan. Now that report has been released, and she says that people should be paying attention to the inquiry's national action plan when it rolls out across the regions. She met with Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, yesterday to talk about that plan.
Watching the national action plan, because that was the thing we talked about with Minister Bennett. And if she's already wanting to have a conversation the day after the report was released, that gives me hope, because that means every region will need to be watching that, how that's going to unfold, how it'll be consulted, how do we do this work to build this plan together.
For more on the National Inquiry and its final report, we're joined by Bernadette Smith. Smith's sister Claudette Osborne was only 21 years old when she disappeared in July 2008, never to be heard from or seen again. Bernadette helped start Drag the Red in Winnipeg following the death of Tina Fontaine. She is now an NDP member of the Manitoba Legislature. Bernadette, thanks for joining us. There were times when you were unsure about this national inquiry. How do you feel now that it's over, and what are your thoughts on the final report?
Well, I'm certainly relieved that it's done, because I've heard from families right across the country that this has been severely triggering for families, and just because the inquiry isn't in their community, they've still been watching families give testimony, and families just feel like there wasn't enough support for them. And of course, I've always talked about this. We've called for a national action plan for Manitoba. Since 2010, we felt that the $92 million could have been better spent on, making sure that women were safe, that women weren't continuing to go missing or be murdered while this inquiry went on.
Are you happy with the results of the final report?
Well, I'm certainly happy that Canada is recognizing that genocide has been happening in this country for years upon years. Certainly in the Indigenous community, we've been saying that, but for Canada to now, agree and start using that language, we now need to shift in how do we move from that word genocide to ensure that genocide doesn't continue to happen in this country, and that future generations are safe. I have grandchildren, my granddaughter, I have one that's 5, one that's 7, and I certainly don't want them to feel like, this this word genocide and this genocidal practice and the system that's been created in Canada is going to continue on, you know, when they have kids, and that their kids are going to feel that they're not 4 times more likely to walk out the door and never be seen again.
In a perfect world, all of the calls for justice would be enacted, but are there certain ones you'd like to see swift action on?
Absolutely. I think that we can be, you know, putting education in schools tomorrow. We need to start looking at language. We need to start bringing in cultural practices. Throughout history, that has been banned. We've seen it through the residential school system. We've seen, you know, now, today, it happening through the child welfare system. Mm-hmm. Kids should be knowing who they are, where they're going, and where they come from. And Murray Sinclair talks about that all the time. And our education system needs to shift to include that within their education, and also in bringing languages into schools. I know Seven Oaks School Division and Winnipeg School Division offer Ojibwe and Cree. I think that needs to happen right across the board in Manitoba schools. I also think that we need to really look at the systemic racism that exists within our policing systems. Mm-hmm. Certainly my sister's case, you know, she was, her case wasn't looked at for 10 days, and we feel that there was 5 things that played a role. And certainly that's not our story only, that's the story right across Canada. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're a woman, if you're Indigenous, if you have an addiction, if you work the streets, or if you have a criminal record, those things, you know, hinder how police look at your case and actually put resources to it. So that needs to shift.
Bernadette, what can individuals do to help implement these calls for justice?
Well, I think as society, and we've been saying this for years, we need to start looking at the way that we treat each other. We can't be blaming each other. We can't be judgmental. Everyone has a story. Like my sister's story, she was raped at 11 years old. You know, she got addicted to drugs to mask that trauma that she had experienced. She was just a baby when that happened to her, and you know, somehow it became, she put herself in that position. You know, she what do you think would happen? And really victim blaming. And I think we really need to, as a society, shift the way that we look at each other, the way we treat each other, and it's going to take all of society. It's not going to be just the government, it's not going to just be the police, but it's also going to be society in general and how we treat each other.
Bernadette, we'll have to leave it there, but really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
It's that time of year when youth are invited to Ottawa to indigenize the Senate.
But what does that look like when senators are holding up a bill on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People? That story's coming up after the break. Off to the East Coast. We've got 14 in cloud in St. John's, 17 and rain in Fredericton, 14 in sunshine in Cartwright, 14 and rain in Happy Valley Goose Bay, 18 in Saint-Jovie, 21 and rain in Montreal, 16 and rain in Gaspe, 23 in sunshine in Windsor, 21 and sunny in North Bay, 25 and rain in Sioux Lookout, 20 and rain in Kapuskasing, 19 and rain in Thompson, 20 and sunshine in God's Lake, 20 and rain in Norway House, 23 for Barons River, Princess Harbor, sunshine there, 28 for Dauphin, 29 and sunshine in Swift Current, 31 and sunny in Estevan, 12 and sunshine in Stony Rapids, 17 and cloud in La Ronge.
Welcome back. Youth across the country are in Ottawa to indigenize the Senate, while senators work on indigenizing the Red Chamber. But the UNDRIP bill is being stalled. Amber Bernard has more.
Please hear all of our voices. Walalio, thank you.
The program is in its 4th year and invites Indigenous youth to testify before the Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples. While the committee works towards indigenizing, Bill C-262 is being held up in the Senate. Some of the youth say the bill to ensure that the laws of Canada are in harmony with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples needs to be passed right away.
With us being here today and being involved with the Indigenize the Senate, my concern wasn't so much that the senators were listening to me. It was that the world was listening to me whenever the video goes live. So with that bill in particular, I can't say enough that it's so important it needs to be passed. So.
One senator says the bill was drafted poorly, and that's why it's been held up in Senate.
So the testimony that we heard yesterday from two eminent legal scholars and a former Supreme Court justice is that the wording of the bill creates enormous uncertainty that we could spend the next 20 years in court arguing about. That is not what anybody wants, but that is in fact what is experts are telling us, including a former Supreme Court justice, are telling us that the wording is such that it could cause huge unintended consequences.
Tanis also says the federal government isn't giving the bill the resources or the time it needs.
Minister Bennett, Minister Metis, the Justice Minister, have refused to come and testify. So we have real concerns, and this is going to be a painful period.
Another youth at Indigenize the Senate believes UNDRIP will create a better country for everyone.
I truly believe the UNDRIP bill, if passed, I truly believe that it'll provide more. It'll truly provide like a strong relationship with between the government and the Indigenous peoples, because through the bill I understand that the rights of Indigenous people are truly respected under the UNDRIP bill. So if passed, I truly believe that we can move forward in a strong and positive manner.
The next committee meeting on Bill C-262 is Wednesday evening. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Inuit students at a school in UNDRIP in subarctic Quebec got a surprise on their last day of school, the chance to talk to astronauts still in orbit. Lindsay Richardson has more.
Station, this is Véronique Morin in UNDRIP, Nunavik. How do you hear me?
This is a conversation over thousands of kilometers in the making. At Kilitac School in UNDRIP, students were given the chance to talk to astronaut David St. Jacques via satellite feed from the International Space Station, and they came prepared.
Why are you in the space station? How do you use the toilet? Is the internet faster in space? Est-ce que tu vois les avions voler?
St. Jacques used to be a doctor in nearby Pervernatuk.
When I feel far from Canada, I have some maple syrup.
Even though he spent 6 months aboard the space station, cruising 480 kilometers above the Earth's atmosphere, he never turns down a question.
Est-ce que je peux voir le Nunavik?
Oui, je peux voir le Nunavik d'ici, par la fenêtre. C'est très, très beau. C'est très facile pour moi de reconnaître la baie du Tson.
Dr. Morin opened Friday's Q&A. Once a village doctor, she also happens to be St. Jacques' wife. Morin shares her space-exploring husband's love for Nunavik.
I think that once you live in the North lives within you. And David likes to say that there's a piece of the tundra with him on board space station.
And there is, literally. Much to the surprise of one little girl who asked about an ivory ring made by her grandfather before she was born.
Yes, actually, this ring was made by Daniel Humaluk. Yeah, and you know what? If you ask Dr. Véronique Morin, who's with you, my wife, she has a very similar ring because this is the ring we use to get engaged and then to get married. So we have a little bit of umiak with us.
St. Jacques also showed off his sealskin cuff and a pair of tiny artisanal mittens.
That was a really touching moment for everyone. You could feel the connection that people felt to David and seeing a part of their own community being in space was, I think, a moment of awakening, maybe for many.
A once-in-a-lifetime chance to see parts of the far north in the far reaches of space.
Good seeing you.
Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Love that story about their wedding rings.
Yeah.
Time for another quick break.
But first, here's the rest of Thursday's weather forecast. To northern Alberta, we've got 11 and rain in Fort Chip, 15 and rain in Fort McMurray, 18 and rain in Red Deer, 24 lots of sunshine in Lethbridge. Tofino's rainy and 13 degrees, 15 and rain for Victoria and Vancouver. 11 in cloud in Fort Nelson, 12 and rain in Prince George, 15 and sunshine in Sandspit. 21 and sunny in Dawson City, 18 and sunshine in Mayo. 12 and sunny in Norman Wells, 7 and rain in Yellowknife. Tuktoyaktuk is 12 and sunshine. Paulatuk 5 and sunny. 0 and snow in Cambridge Bay. Chesterfield's 2 and cloud. Whale Cove's 2 and cloudy as well. 4 and sunshine in Arctic Bay. 4 mostly sunny in Clyde River. 5 and rainy in Iqaluit. Welcome back. Ceremonies have begun overseas commemorating the 75th anniversary of D-Day events that are considered the beginning of the end of the Second World War.
A daring lead was required. Waving his helmet, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt rushed forward shouting, "Come on over, there's nothing to worry about here." He thus personally led the survivors of at least 4 parties in turn across the bridge.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau read an account on the actions of Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Merritt, the first Canadian awarded the Victoria Cross in the Second World War. Other world leaders also delivered remarks during the 90-minute ceremony in Portsmouth, where Canadian, British and American soldiers boarded ships to invade Nazi-occupied France.
Canadians who fought in the Second World War were honored at a moving ceremony in France today. On the eve of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, veterans and dignitaries were on hand at the Canadian War Cemetery in Benny-Sirmer.
I'm so surprised to see so many people at this. It's so gratifying to be.
He was a member of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, Princess Louise's, and was killed in Normandy.
Those who volunteered.
Some of the fallen were given special recognition as their photos were held up. About 14,000 Canadians invaded Normandy with the Allied troops. 359 were killed by day's end and 715 were captured or wounded. Veteran Affairs puts the number of Indigenous soldiers who served in the Second World War at 3,000, but admits the exact number is unknown. And there'll certainly be more coverage of those events in the coming days.
For sure.
That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday.
For much more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and download the new APTN app. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. Go Raptors. We'll see you back here tomorrow.